So, Andy, can you bring us up to date on the recent environment in terms of fundraising and the activity out here in Asia?
Certainly. I'd say halfway through last year, starting the middle of the year into the third quarter, we saw a real freezing of the market for funds, very difficult fundraising environment. Limited partners very much holding their cards close to their vests, not wanting to commit to funds. It was a very difficult environment. Towards the beginning of this year, and certainly moving into now where we are into the third quarter, we've seen a real unfreezing of that, almost like a spring. Money is starting to flow. Limited partners are committing to funds. Sometimes they're committing even larger amounts to funds than they had committed in the past. In fact, we see a number of limited partners really concentrating their efforts in some of the top funds and not spreading their cash so thin. And the best performing funds are getting raised, maybe slightly below what their expectations would have been a year ago, but nonetheless it's still very large numbers and still very successful and optimal for their investment strategy. So it's been a difficult year, a very uncertain year, but it's certainly, we seem to be coming out of that, and money seems to be returning at least to Asia, at least to the best performing funds.
Well, it's great news. It sounds like the LPs are a little more discerning this time around about the funds that they invest in.
Very, very discerning. I think, from what I can gather, less willing to take any risks on newer funds sometimes. Much less willing to sort of spread the money to funds they don't think are performing as well just to get into the space. They'd rather concentrate in the best funds. Perhaps there's a perception that even among the best funds that not all limited partners can commit again, and so therefore there's more room for them to make larger commitments to the best funds. Discerning, and I say also part of the discernment is they're looking at terms which have been long settled and deciding how they can improve their position. Some of the terms, economic terms, certainly pressures on management fees, on management fee offsets, as well as issues of transparency, wanting to know more about what's going on, more information, more reporting, more essentially being able to monitor the general partners.
And have the GPs been flexible in the term discussion?
Well, I think difficult to say. I mean, I think the general partners like to be responsive, I'll say that. And I think on issues about transparency, they're always happy to talk about it. On the economics, probably a little bit more intense discussions, but I think the general partners realize that it's a very difficult market still for fundraising, notwithstanding the fact that money is coming out. LPs are more discerning. It is more difficult, that they need to be more responsive perhaps to LPs in this environment.
And do you see these changes in terms of in the terms and the structure? Do you see these as structural changes that will last a long time, or do you see that as just another cyclical change, and when the market comes back, it'll swing back the other way?
I think it's probably going to be a little bit of both. My sense is the transparency issues may be more structural. I think we'll see long-term as these funds, essentially it's a maturation of the funds, greater reporting, greater LP involvement, greater amounts of information going to the limited partners. The economics, on the other hand, may be more cyclical in the sense that just reflects, to a certain extent, basic bargaining power right now as to where the economics are. But for issues about transparency, I think that it's quite possible those are around to stay longer. I mean, partly that's just, the market becoming more institutionalized, the market becoming more sophisticated, more international, and transparency goes along with that. But the economics are probably up for renegotiation if, as we hope, times are much better in the next fundraising cycle.
Are you seeing any or hearing about any changes that are coming about in the industry as a result of regulations? In Beijing, we certainly hear about this all the time.
Well, I think on two levels. I mean, one of the levels that we're certainly seeing about this that has knock-on effects is all the increased pressure on placement agents in the United States. that's obviously directly affecting the placement agent industry. But in a sense, it's also having some knock-on effects with general partners deciding whether to hire placement agents, whether to go it alone. If they do hire placement agents, how they deal with disclosure about placement agent activities to, for example, state pension funds and the like, who are very nervous about the use of placement agents. So that regulatory effect has had one. Secondly, a number of the financial proposals being proposed by the Obama administration will have knock-on effects to general partners that raise anything other than de minimis capital in the United States. I mean, the regulations are not yet fully formed, but we see that as probably being the most likely direction, that there will be some degree of regulation, probably more akin to the current investor advisor regulation, but we'll have to see. I think there is more regulation on the way for the industry, certainly.
Okay. What about sitting in Beijing? We hear a lot about the LP market being awash in liquidity and RMB, and we hear more and more about funds preparing to come out with RMB funds, foreign funds as well as local funds. What do you see or hear about in that respect?
Well, I think it's probably fair to say that any domestic PRC or foreign fund manager that does any kind of investing in China is considering some kind of RMB program, even if not necessarily considering implementing it, at least looking at it, deciding whether they should do it, whether it makes sense for them. I don't think anybody can ignore the issue, saying, well, we just won't talk about it. That much said, I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood areas of fund practice today. I mean, essentially we see that there are three kinds of RMB funds currently. A purely domestic renminbi fund, such as that raised by a number of quite large foreign fund managers, raise a purely domestic onshore, but it's all PRC investment, PRC involvement. It's fairly straightforward. There's the so-called 5C fund, foreign invested venture capital enterprise funds, which are usually pushed mainly toward high-tech investments. And then there's the third category, which I think everybody's been chasing, and people are wondering when it's going to finally happen, is the true Sino-foreign fund, with a foreign general partner and foreign and domestic investors in one fund with full convertibility of the U.S. dollars. Our interview here is not long enough to go into all the details about that, but there are a number of hurdles to doing that under current regulation, not the least of which is how you get your offshore U.S. dollars or any other hard currency onshore into renminbi into this vehicle. We think it's not currently feasible or possible under current regulations, but we have heard a lot of discussion coming out of Beijing that there seems to be some response to the government to making this possible in the medium term and what steps they're taking. So I think it's a little bit of watch this space, but it's certainly something we're looking at for many clients and trying to implement ourselves.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.